Welcome to What CEOs Talk About. Do you wonder what CEOs talk about behind closed doors? How they bring their vision to reality? How do they overcome and succeed through adversity? We share that and so much more with each episode. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hello, everybody. My name is Martin Hunter. I am the host of What CEOs Talk About, where we translate strategy into frontline operations. Today, I love the title. Didi, thank you very much for being on the show. Truly appreciate it.
Thank you, Martin. I'm thrilled to be here.
So, Didi, tell us, can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I am currently a partner at Wing Venture Capital. We're based in Palo Alto. I live in California. I am also my household IT department. And my background is that I was a 20-year-long operator in cybersecurity.
Oh, wow. Wow, that's crazy. Great, thank you. And why? So what is the title of the show?
This one is called The Executive Whisperer.
Oh, I'm so curious. So tell us about your journey way back when. Where were you born? Where did you grow up? Kind of who makes and what makes you the person that you are today?
Have you got a minute?
We got a lot of time.
All right. So I grew up in Europe, and I worked my way through sales to leadership. And from a sales position into an executive position, and then from there to building out multiple teams. And my real specialty, has always been operationalizing the business, finding the problems in the business and keeping things moving forward, and really sort of understanding the psychology of a business. I think of them as organisms, and they're living things, right? They're constantly looking for growth. And so how do you optimize them? How do you, create culture that is meaningful and that draws, a lot of interest from the exterior? And how do you reduce friction to enable a lot of that growth? So those are some of the things that make me unique, is my operational background and my interest in people, which makes for, a lot of, I think, just cultural, I'm trying to find the right word, but it's, basically an interest in culture. How do you create amazing culture? How do you elevate fantastic people?
Yeah, so. I completely agree. We do something very similar at Urgio, and we take a hard look at behavioral-based leadership, right? So when you look at behaviors, if you can take a picture of it, then you can measure it. If you can measure it, you can manage it. And it's really based out of behavioral-based safety. Way back when they started doing that. So we've applied that to operations as well. So what does good look like? And there is a good culture looks like something. When you put those values on the wall and you go collaboration. Well, what does collaboration look like at company X? Collaboration at company Y will look similar. They might call it something else. They might say, teamwork. And the word itself can be tore down. I loved how you say they're living organisms, because I think the exact same thing. I think it's so beautiful to see things connect and live and breathe and grow. And you're absolutely right. So in Europe, where was it in Europe?
My mom was German, and my dad lived for 20 years in the UK, and I went to school in France.
Do you speak French as well?
I do. I speak French and German and really shitty Italian. Okay.
You can say shitty.
I speak terrible Italian.
You can say shitty all you want. You can say.
It gets better after a glass of wine, but yeah.
Good. That's my French is pretty good, proper French, because we lived and worked in France as well. So you're
nice.
Born for operations when you think about German engineering and the culture behind it, and then the business sense of being very English and very proper. So wow, you're born into being a business person in operations.
Yeah.
So what is the title of the show again?
So it's really an executive whisperer.
So tell us more. Executive whisper. What do you mean?
Yeah, what does that really mean? So what I do is I run the community for a fantastic venture capital firm. And what that means is I'm really a matchmaker between the IT buyer and the advisor and our portfolio companies. So we invest in early seed and A stage companies. And just as a mention, Wing is focused on enterprise technology.
Okay.
So we invest in companies that, with the belief that data is the foundation and that the modern enterprise is data driven.
Absolutely. Our third core value is act on data. So that for us at our company is really act on data. Too many times you go, I got a gut feeling. Okay, I trust your gut. You've got years of experience, but show me the numbers behind your gut feeling. And I trust you. Show me the gut.
Yeah, exactly. And know your data. I mean, it's one thing to ask your data science team to do something, but it's another to be able to actually get your hands on the data and interpret it yourself. So there's a lot of interest right now around artificial intelligence, and it's really the culmination of research and data science, which when you think about the research element of it, that can take years before you build that out. So I'm sort of a human researcher. I've always been fascinated with human behavior, psychology, and what motivates people, which is why I ended up in sales. But in terms of the executive whisperer, I try to help people solve problems, whether it's a founder finding a way to get to market and finding the right customer or the right message that will resonate with a customer, or if it's a customer that's trying to do an internal sale. Maybe they need to add a group to what they're already doing, or maybe they need to find a growth area, maybe they need to find a leader or their own replacement, maybe they need a mentor. So those are all things that I do in my current capacity.
Absolutely. I think that there's too many. I mean, there's a lot of money out there, and when you talk about PE or VC, people have somebody has a big exit and they go, oh well, I'm going to be an accelerator. Like, not to say that all exits are luck, far from it, but just because you were, you got money out of a great idea and maybe a lot of people did well, do you clearly understand the economics and the value and how a fund works? And so just because you got money doesn't mean that you're a VC, or a PE. So
that's right.
Yeah, we deal.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
And my expertise is more in mergers and acquisitions and change management, because I spent a lot more time being an operator than being in a VC. And so I went through 13 M&A.
Wow.
Different exits. I've been through an IPO, which was really fun, by the way. Talk about champagne at 6 a.m., ringing the bell, hugging the IT guy. It was really fun. Fantastic group.
For the listeners, whoever's gone through an IPO, don't let Didi. It is a lot of hard work. That
was after. Well, that's why we were all hugging. It was so much work to get to that point. It was exhausting. It was kind of like working through a pandemic.
There's so many founders that we deal with. They go, hey, listen, we're really considering an IPO. Or like, no, you don't. No, you don't. No, you don't. You want to keep that. I shouldn't say that. It's a good strategy. You have to be ready and willing to commit to doing it and seeing the benefit of it as well, because it's a lot of work.
Right. Yeah, the road to IPO is paved with, the carcasses of a lot of fantastic companies and teams that, just didn't have what it took. Sadly.
I like that term. That's very, very dark. It's paved with carcasses. I agree. One thing how did you transition? Because I'm very interested. What was the trigger event that led you from operations as being an operator to really leaning into the VC world? Were you approached? Is it a natural transition? How did it go?
Great question. It was by invitation and through introduction. So, relationships are everything, especially these days where it's so hard to get to know people. And so, I was invited with a partner and board member that I had previously interviewed with.
No way.
so I was in multiple startups, and so I had interviewed with this board member, and we just hit it off. And then when they were looking for someone to run their community and build out the function and really, get things accelerated, to your point earlier, and this is building, the customer community. How do you get, folks that can give advice to early stage startups? How do you bring innovation to the customer community? Where are your areas of passion? How well can you network, really? And so that's what I was brought in to do.
I think for the benefit of the listener, because there's a lot of listeners that are out there that are, and we get approached quite frequently. So how do I sell? How do I get investors? So when you, and I'm sure people are intrigued right now saying, okay, what does she mean by community? Does she mean like ... or does she mean ... So let not me speak for you. But what do you mean when you say build a community?
That is really unique to every community. I mean, when you have a gathering of like-minded folks, you have a community. When it comes to how we approach community, it's really building out relationships between advisors and buyers. And in some capacity, board members, board advisors, and helping understand what their needs are, and then mapping that back to either the wing portfolio or one another, helping them stay in touch with what's new. Because especially now, it's really difficult to see, the forest for the trees. People are very, closely mired in their own, operational day-to-day and really don't have an opportunity to look forward. So the difference between being in an organization where you're building something yourself versus where you're investing in the future build is we're looking at things 3 to 5 years out, in some cases 10 years out. I mean, the average, exit time frame for a VC is 6 to 8 years. So we live in the future. And so when you're talking to an executive, it's actually a key indicator as to where a person's mindset is. A line manager is thinking today.
That's absolutely true.
A director is thinking about next year, right? And then an executive is thinking about 2 to 3 years out. And especially once you get into the C-level, they absolutely live in the future. And if they are living today, then there's a problem.
Agreed.
Because then they don't trust or can't trust the people that are living in today, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. There's so many truths that ring in your executive whispering terminology and title to say, well, especially when you have startups, right? Startups, everybody calls themselves a CEO. You're a one-man band. Like you're the CEO of nothing, one chief. C stands for chief. So chief, you have to be in charge. If you're referring to a chief, that means that there's a band. If there's a band, then that means there's more than 2 people in it, right? So don't call yourself a chief executive officer. It's okay to be the founder. It's okay to be the principal. You don't have to call yourself a CEO, right? And understand a lot of people forget to break down the title of chief executive officer. Executive means that you're providing direction for the execution of the organization. The officer means that you've signed a dotted line. You've signed with blood that you will do everything that you can in your power to make this ship, this chief, this organization, this culture, do the best of your abilities for the betterment of that organization. And they tend to kind of forget that. And especially at startups, they're like, do. We're like, okay, if you're truly a visionary, let's get you out of the doing phase and let's get you there. And this is where kind of people like you and I really come in and say, okay, get out of the way. We'll find you somebody who can actually integrate and build your company for you.
Exactly. Yeah. Find your mission. And then clearly communicate it, and then, attract people that have a like-mind mission orientation.
Can you explain for the listener in simple terms, what is a VC? Because we say VC. What does VC stand for, and what does a VC do, live, breathe?
Yeah, venture capital. And so when you think of capital, and I like to put an A in front of it, so it's adventure
That's
capital.
True. That's so true. Yeah.
It's a bit of an adventure. You never know what you're going to get from your investment. So capital meaning, basically funds. And so venture capital firms, they operate very much like a law firm in terms of, how they manage their day-to-day. And so they raise a fund with, limited partners that will, invest a certain dollar amount. And then they invest that on behalf of, their limited partners. So with the intent that if I, give you $100,000, that I'm going to get $1 million out of it, hopefully, or a multiplier return. So it's money for a period of time. And the investment strategy usually is contingent on the domain expertise of the venture capital firm. Most of them have a stated thesis around what their interests are, what their, domain knowledge is in. And they're some of the most intellectually powerful people and just amazing people I've ever met. It's part of the reason I also use the term whisperer this morning is because it's a very quiet environment. It's almost like being in the Harvard, library where everyone in there is soft spoken, but they carry a big club,
That is very true.
Teddy Roosevelt, they're thinkers. They're not necessarily interested in getting super busy. There's actually time built into the calendar for thought, which is something that I think all executives should do.
That's what I force my partners to do. As a managing partner, I always say that there should be between 5 to 10% of your week just left for thinking. No matter where you like to do it, it's and behaviorally and biologically, it's proven that hot water or water running on your face. So when you say, "Oh, I'm in the shower and I had this crazy idea," there is a biological. At Berkeley, we went through this thesis of that's why great ideas are born in the shower, is because the hot water induces a different thought pattern within it, and that's how the deep sea divers that hold their breaths. That's how they can downgrade they put their thought process and vibrations to the back of their mind. So anyways, that is such a powerful and important component of, especially on the strategic side. I mean, that's the one thing that VCs do well, is on the strategic side. I think what's the place that you feel and that we feel is really good is, okay, so I've got a whole bunch of money. I want to invest it. And there's a huge due diligence process because they kind of say, here's some money, but I'm not really in control of your future.
Right. And define a big amount.
That's true. Well, it ranges, for some people, $10 is a big amount. That's for my 9-year-old boy, $10 is a lot of money for him.
Exactly.
So tell us, what does your VC do differently?
We're really passionate about innovation, and the name Wing is an indicator that we operate as a co-pilot for our founders. So we're looking in the future, we're at a high level, we're looking at the movements that are happening in the industry, not just the trends, not just, the categories. When you look at quadrants, when you look at what the Forrester or the analysts at Gartner are looking at, they're looking at typically lagging indicators, where, to your point, we're looking at, from a diligence perspective, at the future, what's coming. And we can see that because we're sitting on boards, we're talking to customers, we're constantly researching markets and trends, and also because we have the history typically. So, history repeats itself. When you look at some of the downturns in the market and the upturns, they've happened before. The question is, what was different then versus now? And so when you look at, where the investment cycles are, it's a very, pattern. You can see the patterns when you start to analyze enough data. And, one of the things that, for folks that are interested in VC and breaking into it, you have to have the ability to retain a vast amount of data.
That is so true.
And retrieve that data at your fingertip. So if you're the kind of person that always has to think twice before, you can remember something, VC may not be for you.
I agree. I totally agree. You have to be able to quickly access data to evaluate an opportunity on any given moment.
Yes, and you also have to be able to retrieve that data and catalog it in your mind and then analyze that information, right? So be able to do deductive reasoning and critical thinking. Those are two of the core components needed, but then the ability to, defend a position, because often our VCs are board members. That's part of what goes along with making an investment, is the ability to help govern and not just manage. That's not the interest, right? You hire people to do that. This is more about governance and setting the course, finding the mission. So when it comes to, what makes great VCs and what makes great board members, they have the ability to compute on the fly.
I agree.
With a wide amount of different data types and historical references. So, I've seen amazing things. Like, I've seen our board members watch a presentation that is slides and slides worth of data sets, right? And I remember we were in a meeting one day and one of our investors was like, wait a second, we were on slide 15. And he's like, go back to slide 3. When I analyzed that, the ARR that you're talking about didn't add up. And he had actually mentally computed how much, and he remembered it and which slide number. That's the level of, memory and processing.
I agree. There's conversations sometimes that we have, and I've identified, I think that the importance as a managing partner is to identify your replacement as soon as possible. And so in my replacement, we always chit chat, and he goes, how do you remember all of this stuff? I was like, I don't know. I was just, that's how I analyze. But then they're trying to crack my brain and saying, hey, well, how do we proceduralize this? How do we capture this in a system where everybody can replicate that? And I said, well, there's certain things, young man, you just can't replicate. There's just
that's right.
There's just things you can't. I need to put a big shout out to the Kolbe Index, the Kolbe test. I don't know if you've ever done that, but it's a MO. You have all these behavioral, the DISC and all that good stuff, the OCDI. And well, what I like that's different about the Kolbe is it gives you your MO, your operate. So are you a quick start? Are you a thinker? And no matter how much you try to break it, it's kind of your OS, right? It stays with you. And then you can place people in different. So the highly detailed people, when we bring on people within our firm, we always have them do a test, that Kolbe test, to say, well, okay, you want to work with us, attitude, skill, knowledge, and experience is what we always, in that order, right? You get, because
100%. I love that you use that. I do the same thing. Attitude. You can't fake attitude.
You can't.
It's the internal dialogue.
Exactly.
People with a great attitude that are willing to do things differently and learn and change. Great.
And
that's the foundation of relationship right there.
And the skills you can always teach. You can always teach skills.
You can add skills all the time.
So we would rather hire somebody who has the right attitude, the skill set, and not necessarily the knowledge a little bit, depending on, the maturity of the position that we're bringing in, of course. If we're bringing on a senior director, we're expecting that person has knowledge and experience in that area. But when it comes time to hire junior people and administrators or managers, we're always kind of like, okay, do you have the right attitude? If you got the right attitude, then we put the Kolbe test and go, you wanted to go economics, but you're really, really good at growth because you're that quick start. You got this. So as much as you love economics, we'll teach you that. But where you really fit is there. And that's where you'll be the most productive, the most happy to start. And then we'll build your trajectory to kind of change you into economics later on. And it has always worked for us so far. So
that's great. I have a similar scenario, but from a human angle. So I'm always interested in people, right? So where some people have a recollection of numbers, and of course, when I ran sales, I remembered all my numbers. But now I remember things like, do they have kids? What's their dog's name? I remember the things that people care about, what is their, where do they live? Do they mountain bike? What's their, these are the things that never used to matter, but they matter now, because those are how you forge a connection, right? You get into the other person's world and you remember the things that matter to them. I remember one executive had a really great looking guitar in the background, which is one of the beautiful things of the pandemic, right? You're in people's homes. You get to know them on a completely different level. It's, at first people were really worried about it. It's like, oh, I'm so sorry. There's noise in the background. Now it's completely expected. And to some degree, it's delightful, right? Is. You get to see people in their element, and people are so different now. And, what was considered absolutely crucial before, you had to wear a collared shirt, you had to show up in the office, none of that matters anymore. None of it. I mean, I go to events now and it's a rare thing when people are wearing a business outfit, and those, I just cleared out my closet with all those suits. Who's going to wear them? No one's going to wear them again.
So I offer how I give as I volunteer as a chief operating officer for an organization called Mission Possible. So they take people from less fortunate areas and bring the dignity by providing work and then getting them back on track to get back into the workforce. So we had the gala that we hadn't had in 2 years. So it's funny because all the suits were a little bit tight. I pulled my shirt out, I pressed my shirt and everything. So I go to put my tie on and poof, the button comes off. I'm like, oh, damn it. And so, the one thing that was quite nice is we had a few female participants that said, I get to wear my shoes again. I got to wear my heels again. So, some people who enjoy dressing up was quite funny, because I agree with you 100% that the world is changing on how we operate. And a critical component, I think that as a whisperer, I think that there are too many executives now don't understand a fundamental component of human need, which is, do you see me? Do you hear me? Do I matter?
100%. And I'll even add that to the Great Resignation, which is the term being used for everyone leaving their jobs in droves, right? So what's important about that is understanding the reasons why people leave their job. Mm-hmm. And the first one is, I don't make a difference. Mm-hmm. The second one is, my leadership does not have my back.
Yes.
There's other reasons beyond that, financial, mm-hmm. economic, or, economy, opportunity. But really it comes down to advancement, and it comes down to being heard and seen and contributing. People want to contribute and they want to connect.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's the biggest thing, I think, as a whisperer, I think if we used, because I really like that term, is having people understand, hey, let's go back to governance, because you said governance before. And no matter how much VCs are data driven, or the people who are part of VCs, governance is all about leadership. It's all about behaviors. The numbers are just a target. That's the direction. That's the speed. We have to measure something, to a target to be at. But how you get there, I mean, unless we're robots and mechanical stuff, still to this day, they are people. People are leading people. So therefore, there has to be that human component and human or behavioral management that needs to be put in place.
Right. And it's much more effective to whisper than to scream.
Oh, yeah.
So, an interesting story that someone told me recently, where there was a group of engineers that would get together, and there was only one female in that group. And she would sit at the table while everyone was arguing. And she would just, in a very calm voice, she would just keep talking. And over time, when they were done yelling, they would lean in and they would sit down and they would mimic her behavior of being calm. And then they would stop talking so they could hear what she was saying. And she managed to carry the day by being a very consistent and quiet performer. Just, she made her point. She made it very calmly, very rationally. And it got everyone to sort of gather around and just move forward.
Winston Churchill. So I like stoicism. I enjoy reading about justice, temperance, courage, and wisdom. And one of the quotes that I love the best is Winston Churchill, who said, "It takes courage to stand up and talk, but it also takes courage to sit down and listen."
Love that.
All right.
That's great. Yeah. Did you see that quote about his wife, Clementine?
No, I did not. Please share.
She was talking about one of her former beaux, and Winston Churchill was like, "Oh, did you see where he ended up?" And she was like, "Yes, well, if he had stayed with me, he also would have been prime minister."
Oh, yes. I love that one. Yeah.
And she was his fiercest advocate, and she was his whisperer. You know, everybody needs one. And it's amazing what you can do without saying much.
I think and again, back to human behavior, it doesn't have to be heard. It can be demonstrated. Language, we're so very transactional. And you said this. Well, hold on a second. I can say, I always say, how you say things is more important than what you say. If you say, "I love you," and you walk away, does that really mean that you love you? Or, if you're fully bodied and fully engaged and I say, "I love you," then there's more power to it than the other way around. And I think that there's too many leaders who tend to say something and forget to say, what's the intention behind the message? And be truthful, be transparent, say what needs to be said, right?
That's right. Yeah. And even, learn how to tell a good story. It's one of those things that really, gets people galvanized around an idea, is if you tell them, and I learned this actually from the CIO of PwC. He was talking recently, and he was saying, tell the story about where you are and how far you've gotten and where you're going.
Yeah.
And then have an active dialogue about the journey. Where are you going? What does it matter? What's everyone's participation? Where do you create collaboration and cross-functional, support? How do you get criteria? And now all of a sudden you have buy-in. And that's one of the fundamental elements also behind change management, right? Which we all had to deal with change abruptly and massively, especially, in the beginning of 2020. So how did organizations that survived well handle that change? And it's all about that, storytelling and then inclusion.
People forget that there's a systemized approach to storytelling, right? And the best way is, I always say, well, get into the car. What's the context? What's the action that we want to do? And what's the result? And you throw in a bad guy, you throw in motive, like you make it spicier as you want to make it spicy. But I agree with you. Storytelling is critical in regards to, and I get in AI in the VC, especially on the AI side of things, because you guys have to live so far in the future. I mean, let me tell you, there's one investor that I absolutely love. He says, "Martin, I live so much in the future that I don't have back pockets on my jeans." I laughed on that one. I said, there you go. So tell us, what's the biggest issues that you see now in the industry where you are?
Well, I work across industries, right? So we're in a really fortunate place right now where there's a lot of capital. It makes things a lot more competitive, right? So deal by deal, there's a lot of interest in terms of investing. So we have to do more due diligence, and we have to do more research and, find deals earlier in stage. There are a lot of investors also that traditionally would have invested later and are now investing earlier because there's so much competition, right? And there aren't as many companies that make it as far to our earlier discussion. So, but here's an interesting point. So we did a summit recently where we gathered together, and this was in person. So we went to, the Rosewood Hotel up on Sand Hill, and we had about 260 executives. Most of them had flown in.
Oh, wow.
Which is also an interesting data point. So our team did an amazing job of gathering folks. But the number one topic was burnout. And that was across industry. I mean, we had folks from every industry imaginable, and mostly C-level executives and mostly Fortune 500, but we also had some great, federal government employees there, and folks from, state and local. So it was interesting to hear that burnout is pervasive right now, and it's a major concern.
I felt it firsthand when COVID hit. We dropped 35% of our clients dropped. They said, and we respected that. We're like, okay, I completely understand. You don't want to necessarily pay extra to get you there. You're going back and you're turtling. You're going in a protective way, which in certain aspects, I support and understand. Like, it's your business. That's where you're at. Then all of a sudden, within 20 days, it was like, hey, can you help us? Can you help us? Can you help us? Can you help us? And my servant leadership, I served in the military, and I've always had that hey, whatever I can do to help a neighbor, I always do. I have a very helping nature. And so I'd say yes, I'd say yes, I'd say yes, I'd say yes. To the detriment of my health, to the detriment of my family, I was working 18-hour days. And it just crept up. And I was like, oh shit, I'm fat. I've never been this heavy before, and I'm not healthy. Like, healthy is the new rich right now, and you have to realize that healthy mind in a healthy body, and it creeped up on us too. And that's when we said the same thing to our clients. Hey, hold on a second, take the pulse. We need to leave this. And I mean, there's a great example of Hootsuite, who closed. We're a client of Hootsuite for social media, and they sent us an email and say, hey, love you guys to bits, but don't look for us, any of us, none of us, from, I can't remember what the dates were, but it was like July 2nd to July 9th or something. The whole week, the whole CEOs, everybody just shut Hootsuite down completely and said, hey, we need a break. I think that was very courageous leadership.
I agree. It comes down to leadership, and it also comes down to taking the pulse, right? Understanding where your team is. Do they need a rest? Do they need to, trade off? In the beginning of the pandemic, there was so much emphasis on productivity because there was so much concern that people wouldn't be productive. And I think to counter that, then there was this interest, on the part of employees to make sure that, they could demonstrate that they are productive. And then that set the new bar, right? But the fact that people were underlying all of it, living in fear, not only for their families and for their health, but then also dealing with new regulations and, worried about their kids in school. How do they make sure that they are still, I was joking earlier about being the household IT department, but that it's not actually, it's not that uncommon for parents to also be teaching and to be homeschooling while they're running their jobs. And so people are burning the candle at both ends. And technology use is a beautiful thing, but it doesn't substitute human interaction.
I agree.
And it's so funny because now it's weird to be on the phone, just having a phone call, right? When was the last time you did a phone call or even just a conference call? Those used to be every day. And, I was constantly with here's a funny story. When my son was about 2 years old and just walking around, he picked up a calculator and he held it up to his face because that was his cell phone because he was being mean.
Yeah. Oh, I completely agree. I mean, and then when somebody joins in on a video conference and they're grayed out, you're like, what's wrong with you? Why don't you want to show your face?
Yeah,
right?
What's hiding? Yeah.
There's a few times though, there's a few people who said, hey, listen, I want to walk around. I don't want to be sitting at my desk. I want to talk to you and walk around. That's fine. Go ahead. Right. I think that there's a lot of, it's cut the T&E budgets drastically, and
absolutely.
So we've closed so many deals without actually shaking hands.
Isn't it a beautiful thing, though? I mean, there's a whole new level of trust that people have in, the business needing to move forward. So interesting story. And this was a friend of mine who was at IBM at the time told me this. So they were running a really special operation where they were reproducing a situation that only few CEOs have ever had to face. And this is where your critical teams and all of your assets have been frozen in a ransomware situation. How do you respond? Right? So all of your systems have been hijacked and everything has been shut off. How do you communicate with your teams? And what do you do? So, and at the time, this was a real life scenario, and it had happened to a CEO who at the time was the CEO of Maersk.
Oh.
And their shipping company. And it was well documented. So the situation was he had to communicate with his teams that were basically hauling cargo on ships around the world, right? So the world's supply chain. And he happened to have cell phone access to his teams because they had thought forward, and gotten those numbers in advance. And what he told them was, customer first, you have all financial and legal authority to make the right decision, do the right thing.
Wow.
Done.
That is absolutely beautiful. And so when you think about it, delegate, facilitate, elevate, and celebrate, all in like 3 lines of text. That is exactly. Crazy. Oh, that is crazy good. Oh my goodness. I'm with you. I think the commute, I've started going back to the office because I work so much better at the office as well. I mean, for us managing, it's funny because we had been working from different locations. We're on all continents. So for us, we had GoToMeeting, we had Skype, we had all of those things before. And then we were early adopters of Zoom, and I should have invested when I first got it. And everybody's like, "Hey, have you heard about this thing Zoom?" I was like, "Yeah, we've been." And so anyways, that's my claim to fame. I should have invested when I was an early adopter. Damn it.
I met with the CIO of Zoom not too long ago, and he's just smiling all the time. Life is good.
You think?
Right?
Let's go from a $12 company to a $12 billion company. Oh my goodness. It's amazing how when you think that your brand name defines a process, a behavior, it's in like Kleenex, like fridge, like, I mean, wow. When you think about it, that's something that you put on your gravestone. That's for sure.
100%.
Founder of Zoom. Damn.
No, this was the CIO. They still, I mean, I think interestingly, explosive growth and change can be just as stressful on an organization. And I've been in hypergrowth companies. It's a beautiful thing, especially when you're on that road to IPO. But to your earlier point, it's so much work, and especially on the teams that start the business, because they're then responsible for bringing in their next generation and their replacement, hopefully. And they're also responsible for training everyone and sharing the knowledge. So there's an equal amount of stress whether you're rapidly accelerating or decelerating the business, and just as much communication needed, which is, I think that's the hardest part, is like, what do you communicate when, how often, how deep do you go into the detail? I mean, I have some thoughts around that, but I'd love to hear what you think.
I mean, it's funny because we tackle both ends of the spectrum. So, we take from startup to sale, and the explosive growth is like, and then my partner's like, "Could you have picked anything more stressful for us to do?" I'm like, "Well, you guys joined." I was like, "It's not like I picked you guys joined us." But I agree that the same stress level, the explosive growth, what I find different is that the energy at the explosive growth is often youthful and energetic. Everybody's excited and they're ready and willing. And even if you put in big days, there's like, yay, yay, yay. Everybody's like rah, rah. At the back end, the IPO, there's so much administration and so much preparation.
Yeah, you're right. 100%. There's a lot of vim and vigor in the beginning and excitement. Yeah, that is one of the defining cultural, definitions, is that openness, right, of people just high-fiving each other in the hallway, and a lot of just camaraderie, and yeah, you're in the trenches together, but it's also really fun.
It's the biggest difficulty I think that we're faced with a lot of our clients, and in that, because I want to bring that back to executive whispering, is I always tell them, hey, listen, when we start hitting 50 people, you're going to have to start firing people, because there's going to be duplication of effort, and then there's going to be streamlining and all that good stuff. It's like, oh yeah, and then the day comes and they go, this sucks.
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, it does suck, and I told you so. Like, I told you that this was because whoever brings you from 0 to 10 is not the same team that takes you from 10 to 100 and from 100 to 1,000, right? So that's the end of the woo, like, excitement is like, oh shit, we got to fire people. It's like, yeah, well, you're not firing them. Basically, you're laying them off, because
that's right.
Yeah.
So to pivot on that point though that you made, I always find it really interesting in companies that are doing really well and that are in a growth stage. There's a couple of indicators, so human behavior indicators. One of them is they hire a lot of athletes. So they hire people that are attractive. That's one of the indicators. Another is that people congregate. So you find that at trade shows, after work, at dinners, people want to get together. There's this sort of effusion and there's this enthusiasm around the business, and people don't even care what they're talking about. They're just excited, And so when you go to a trade show and you see a lot of the employees of the company that are at their own booth, and they're talking back and forth, and that energy that brings more people to the table. Like, I wonder what the buzz is all about, right? So it's a literal buzz versus companies that are, to your point, later, and it's much more posturing. It's a lot more protective of the existing business. You have to think twice before you talk. You have to be much more measured in how you're behaving. I mean, there's a certain sort of like growth to that. There's a certain maturity that you have to be in those organizations and really thrive. But I do like the early phase, right? When companies are like,
It is fun to be at. And for us, as an active contributor to their business, it is always, we kind of, I don't want to say fight over, but we look at them and go, oh, that's a nice one. I want that one, right? And we kind of have to go rock, paper, scissors, who gets to be, who gets to work on that file. And it's pretty funny. But now I'm an older goat now, so I let the younger generation go, hey, listen, go have fun with those ones, and I'll reap the benefits. You just work hard at getting my boat, okay?
Exactly right. The bigger the boat, the better the boat, right?
Hey, guys, it's always about size, right? For guys, it's always about size. Men are just foolish creatures. All right, so competitive, so comparison. So one of the podcasts that we did with Jason Mercer, who was he's another investor as well, and he wanted to talk about being a black man and how do I, as a black person, deal, and it still affects some of the work that he does. So the title was Intentional Solutions for Intentional Problems. And since then, it's really opened my eyes on how much I appreciate a diverse workforce, of having both sides of male, female, and as many different vision, views, MOs, Colby test around it. I mean, I'm not accepting the status quo anymore. And I'm not promoting females because they're females, but I'm intentionally recruiting more females for us to have a better, because I looked at our senior partners and I say, hey guys, there's 4 white dudes here. Like, at a certain time, somebody's going to say, hey, are you being intentionally and building your diversity within your organization? And we need that for mindset. And I think that is something, when you think about executive whispering, is do it the right thing in regards to balancing out who's in and who's really working on and in your business, in my opinion.
That's right. And interestingly enough, it's a topic I'm really passionate about. I've helped several folks get on boards, and many of them have been women, not all of them, but I was very intentional about helping women in particular because, women don't always know how to play the game, quote unquote. And so, just a few things that they can do differently. And all of a sudden, and I was lucky enough to get coached by a very good friend of mine at the time. And things like I would go into a meeting and I would say, I think, right? And he's like, stop right there. You don't think, Yeah. You don't think. So you slam your fist on your table and you say, there's no alternative. This is absolutely critical, and this is what we have to do. I've looked at it from every other way that you can look at it. This is the best direction. Okay? And then people go, okay. So it's interesting how women communicate, how typically women are looking for consensus. What do you think? What do you think? They end a sentence with a question. So what alternatives are there? As opposed to what other alternatives are there?
Yeah.
None. Right? So how you inflect, how how confident you are in what you're saying, how decisive you are when you're communicating. Conversely, with men, I would say the opposite, right? So where women need to be conveying that they're able to make a decision and stand by it and defend it, I would say to men, be more consensus driven.
Correct.
Because you'll often find that helps you with change management. Because when you're asking people, you're not actually asking them. You already know the answer. The reason you're asking them is to get them to think about it and start getting the input. And also because you may be surprised at some of the answers that you get. Because you may not have seen something that someone else can see at another level, at a skip level, that would have saved you a lot of time and heartache later.
I always look into situations, and I always coach and mentor either the CEOs, the founders, and my team to say, go into the room thinking you're wrong.
Interesting.
Always go in the room thinking you're wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. And actually, when it comes to business justification, right? So this has been a hot topic lately in terms of how do you justify change? How do you justify investment? How do you get new resources or more team, more money, whatever? And oftentimes that comes down to the language that you're using. So how well do you pitch it? And, are you in a traditional environment where it's very PowerPoint driven and very top-down decision making? Or are you in a growth organization where it's team and collaborative and it's a narrative discussion, right? It's a very different approach in either one of those scenarios.
So my daughter who plays rugby, she's 13, going to be 14. So I'm a high-level rugby coach, like very high level, and it's amazing to see the biological behavior of the U14 boys and the U14 girls.
Oh yeah.
And the U14 girls are very collaborative. They'll play rugby and they go, "Oh, I'm sorry. You're playing rugby, ladies. Like it's okay to tackle her."
Smash and destroy.
Exactly, right?
Got the whole.
But they understand that the power comes in number, and that's very mammal-like. That's very biologically. You take the U14 boys, it is a gaggle. None of them know. Nobody wants to take ownership. Nobody wants to be blamed for the poor pass. Nobody wants to do this. It's only at around.
It's raw power. Right?
It's only at around 17 or 18 for the men that they realize that to better improve my personal competency and behavior, for us to achieve, for me to succeed, I need to let go and embrace the partnership with others. It's only around 17 years old that frontal lobe that starts closing up, because it'll take males up to the age of 25 to close that frontal lobe, where frontal lobe gets closed around at the age of 18 for women.
Right.
So you have that, and then you add more muscular power and energy. That's why men's rugby is faster, stronger, is because it's just muscle mass. But you look at the quality of teamwork and collaboration at a younger age, it is biologically, by far, women are so much better at working in teams than men are. That's 100%. And
yeah, and I would take that back to the business and look at, if they're organisms, then they go through different growth stages as well. And so when you look at the earlier stage one, speed is of the essence, right? You have to be able to make iterative decisions and make them quickly. You have to be able to pivot on a mistake and not let it be catastrophic and just keep moving. That's the key, right? And similarly, if you look at the size of the margin, right, expectation, if it's a low margin business, they don't really necessarily care as much about preserving cost.
Correct.
They're much more concerned about growth.
Correct.
Right? Because it's existential. They're not living on margin. They have to make it up on volume.
Agreed.
So they have to be nimble and they have to actually make decisions that are, that are more about, velocity and acquiring new customers, for example. So it's more about growth. So it's an interesting thing when you apply some of these, dynamics in team, whether it's teenagers or whether it's a teenage early stage business, it's a lot of the same thinking.
Oh, I mean, there is so much power. Back in the 80s, like they said, okay, well, if there was a woman in business, she was a bitch because she adopted male criteria or then because she was a bitch. And now I think we see the value of having women behaviors of that collaboration and meeting in the middle, of course, absolutely. There's things that you guys do better than we do, and then there's stuff that we do better. And I think that merging of thought is really where the power is.
Right.
But I mean, I still think that having a woman at a very high level, just like a police officer, it just brings everything down. Like the example that you're giving, it just tones everything down.
Yeah, and interestingly, the functions that were traditionally male versus female. So male was more sales, finance, legal. Female was more marketing, support, and HR, right? So what's interesting now that, the pandemic has happened, you're seeing those functions of HR. Hey, we need talent. Yeah. We need to retain our talent. We need to bring in talent. Hey, maybe you need somebody on your board that looks like your talent pool.
Agreed.
Customer success. Hey, maybe you need someone on your board that understands your customer because they were one, right? Or they communicate with them. And marketing too, the message is now digital. So you can't go out and sell and, sort of lunch your way through to get a deal anymore. You have to actually finesse it from the very first moment that someone hears about you, right? From a marketing, whatever ad or campaign or branding effort, all the way through the flywheel to get to, an actual sale. So it's interesting, the way the pendulum swings between male and female, and some of these traditional things that are now being, changed by virtue of really technology. I think that's been the big equalizer across the board.
The top salesperson that I've ever had was a female, and she crushed it.
Oh, yeah.
All the time. She was smiling. She would listen. She'd be very concise. She would understand. Like my brother is the VP of sales for a large flooring in Eastern U.S. and they cover the entire planet. And he's a good sales guy. He really is. She, in regards to volume, like I would put her toe to toe with my brother. And I'd say, ooh, I can't wait to see how this goes out, right? Like, oh, I really don't know where to put my money on who's going to make the sale. But I think that you're absolutely right, is to have and I like Jason said, intentional solutions for intentional problems. So if you're thoughtful and strategic about it, look at that. So this is a question I ask all guests. What is the reference material of choice that you always go back to? It could be a movie, could be a book, could be a saying, could be something. What is it that you always go back to and share?
I love Good to Great.
Yes.
I also love a book about an expedition to the Antarctic back in the 1900s. And it was about a or a ship called the Endurance.
Yeah, the Endurance with Captain. Yeah. Oh, what was his name? Yes, Shackleton. Yeah.
Shackleton, thank you. So yeah, that's my favorite leadership story ever. I mean, how do you get a bunch of men to stay occupied in the worst possible conditions, right? It doesn't get any worse than having your ship surrounded by ice and then slowly crushed and being, in the middle of an iceberg. And what amazed me about that story is that everyone survived. And he was so convincing that he managed to get a second expedition. Right? He went back and he was like, I know that one failed. Forget the fact that that failed. Let's go back and get our team. And here's why that's a great idea. It was a terrible idea. I mean, if you think about it from an investor's perspective, you totally failed that mission. But he managed to go back and get them, and it's one of those enduring success stories.
Oh, the log that he kept was amazing. The poor gentleman who was the dog master having to eat his own dogs was like eating his own children. It was just like it is my go-to, which is similar to yours, is Master and Commander. It's like
great one.
Yeah, so that is men are meant to be led. That's true. That is absolutely 100% true. So thank you so very much. Look at this. An hour has gone by, and booyah, here's where we at. I think, what's the final word when you think about Executive Whisperer? What do you want people to remember after they've listened to this podcast? What do you want them to do when they leave and they've stopped listening? They're at the end.
There's a saying in sales, which is that you have one mouth and two ears. Listen twice as much. And that I would say that across the board. Listen to your kids. There's no better salespeople, by the way, than kids. And your kids are often a great sounding board for things, even business ideas. You'd be surprised at how wise kids can be. But I would say the same of anyone in your organization. There was an interesting conversation we had with a gentleman who was on 17 tours of the Tour de France.
Holy shit.
So he was the author of Shut Up Legs.
I don't know that one. Okay, I'll have to.
So Shut Up Legs is basically when you're talking to yourself. It's your attitude, right? Success. And so he would say to himself, shut up legs, which is basically what you kind of have to do when you're an executive, right? But he said that in order to get teams to work together, they would take turns letting the least tenured take the lead. And not only did it take them in surprising places, but it also demonstrated leadership with people who the rest of the group never believed had it in them. And so, giving voice to the people that are not empowered in your organization and elevating them to a point where they're actually in charge of something or asked for their opinion, that can be a surprising source of great wisdom.
Wow. Thank you very much. That's my grandfather used to say that to me all the time, the big Scottish brogue. Hey, boy, why do you have 2 ears and one mouth? You should listen twice as much. But back then you'd get a slap at the end of that too. Psh, ow. Okay. Okay. Thank you very much for the lesson. I appreciate that.
This has been a great conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for being on the show. I love to have the deep conversation. It's just absolutely wonderful. So thank you again for being on the show. With that being said, my name is Martin Hunter. I'm the host of What CEOs Talk About. I always forget. Like, subscribe. What else do I have to say, Lucas? Yeah. Comment, whatever, all that, and all of that. So with that said, thanks a lot, folks. Okay.
Thanks for tuning in to What CEOs Talk About. Make sure to click subscribe to get notified about future episodes, or check us out at www.whatceostalkabout.com.